It's not a problem.
I've mentioned it sort of, tongue in cheek on it.
And what I am worried about is it isn't that there's cars, it's who owns them. That's what I've learned.
That people get mad about.
It's who owns the cars.
Yes,
It's
right.
repeat offenders.
That the downtown,
well,
it's like their employees.
Or if it's, yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, what's that?
All
Just
ramps.
like I will bring it again tonight, we got housing on the second floor. You don't want that to go downtown.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the appointed hour of 6 o'clock for our city council work session. Thank you all for being here. And this is a follow-up from a meeting we had, I believe, back in December. And the ambition is to discern conditional use permits in the central business district, and in an effort to give guidance to staff where council is on issuing those and executing those downtown. I will call on the city manager to introduce and lay the groundwork and begin with that.
Thank you, Mayor. You have a brief update, a reminder of where we left things in November. We had a work session in November 12th to kind of review the conditional use permit process and what is required to approve or deny a conditional use. That was after a rather spirited debate on the Rockbridge building in the prior 2 months at the Planning Commission and City Council. So we don't have an application in front of us for a conditional use permit, but we anticipate having one very soon. And so we just wanted to finish the conversation if we can, and hopefully get some feel and direction. I'll start out by pointing out that I find it, odd that we have a conditional use permit for higher education when it's not exactly instruction or classrooms, but again, in a scenario where you have VMI offices or Washington and Lee or Southern Virginia University offices, accountants or attorneys or staff people, human resources, we have under our code of ordinances, because they are considered higher education, that they have to get a conditional use permit. Our code also allows that if it was the Jeremy Carroll law firm or the Jen Bell accounting firm, they wouldn't even need conditional use permit. They would be allowed by right. So we have this oddity in our code, and it creates some tension and problems for us. So one of the questions that we should perhaps consider is, do we agree that that is the appropriate policy? I would suggest that perhaps we should consider changing that. Another point of discussion is, broadly speaking, what is institutional creep? We've had those conversations. We have residents who are looking for the city to do something to stop the change in the physical built environment. We've heard this throughout 2024, and it was loud and clear as well during the Rockbridge building discussion. And yet we don't know exactly what we should be doing to stop institutional creep. We are having a one-party conversation when we're talking about it without either institution of higher learning. And as I suggested in November, I think the instrument of using the zoning code to influence or stop institutional creep, it's a pretty blunt instrument. And my experience with zoning codes, having nothing to do with institutional creep, is that they're usually written and you write them with the best of intentions, and then pretty soon you have an applicant that doesn't fit within the four corners of the zoning code, and you really want to allow that use because it's going to be great and everybody agrees, but it doesn't fit in that four corner box.
It's like the donut shop.
Like a donut shop. Great example, great hypothetical example. Conversely, you could have, in my experience, you will have uses that you really don't want, but they meet the requirements of the code and they are allowed. And people are upset at the city for not having the authority or the gumption or foresight to have stopped it. And so the zoning code is a very imperfect instrument to try and facilitate private use. It's better than anything else we have, I suppose, in one regard, and that, you know, there have to be rules and regulations. But it does sometimes tie your hands in the wrong direction. So, you know, what I'll just say is that so we know what we're talking about, I do anticipate a conditional use coming before you for the Grand Building at the corner of Main and Washington. That is owned by John Adamson, who's here this evening. And probably be two separate conditional use applications, one more concrete and one more specific. As much as Jeremy will allow, we can get into some of the specifics of that this evening if you're interested. Again, there's not a case before you. There will be, and there'll be public hearings following our legal process as we review the case. And I'll invite Arnie to add anything else that I might have missed. You do have the 6 conditions that you have to answer affirmatively to grant or find at least one of them negative to deny the conditional use permit. There is continuous discussion around parking, and for the last, say, 4 months, I've been engaged in broad conversation about parking. Chuck's smiling because he's been at a couple of the meetings. As you know, completely unrelated to conditional use, we've had a request to remove 2 parking spaces in front of the courthouse grounds project. And we've tried to listen intently to what the merchants and stakeholders have said. And the same merchants have been consistent in their argument that we should not remove any parking spaces, including those 2. We also were clear with them that we were going to remove another parking space for safety reasons, not really up for discussion or debate, but we need to do this for safety purposes over on Main Street over by Napatai. And we have subsequently removed that space from a safety visibility standpoint. We're going to continue to explore whether we can put a parking rack there, which was a suggestion made at the meeting. But we've removed the space in the meantime. So we have ongoing tension about parking. I think our parking enforcement is certainly better. We're hearing that specifically from the merchants, and they appreciate it. It doesn't mean that all the parking problems are solved. My observation is, and Arnie has stated this, and I couldn't agree more with Arnie, we don't have a parking problem, we have a parking management problem, and we need to encourage the rotation of parking spaces on Main Street.
When is the parking coming off of North Main Street? When is the parking being removed from North Main Street?
That contract was awarded, and it should have been happening in January, but the contractor is already in breach of the contract and hasn't started. So I don't have a good date for you. The contract has been awarded by VDOT. And it was supposed to be like a 11-month process, and it hasn't started yet. So all of that is to simply say we have these tensions around public services, primarily, I think, parking. I don't think there are other public services that are called into question, whether it's water, sewer, police, fire, rescue. In fact, on the fire rescue standpoint, I think anytime we're talking about a major renovation of a building that either requires or voluntarily has a sprinkler system, life safety is improved and the structure is improved. I'll invite Arnie to add anything else that I may have missed or his own observations. And then I'll turn it over to the mayor or Jeremy if he wants to add anything.
As Arnie's coming forward, I'll remind folks in attendance, this is an opportunity for council to speak freely amongst ourselves. We don't have any business that we're doing. It's just a conversation on a specific focused topic, and we have tremendous resources. And we tend not to engage the public for comments or in discussion or debate. However, with a small crowd, we may solicit some insight from property owner this evening. But one point of clarification, Tom, you mentioned 6 reasonable grounds for denying 5. Okay.
Or 5.
Gotcha.
Miscounted.
Because I said so, that's not reasonable.
That's right.
Arnie, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I really don't have much to add. I listened back through your conversation at your last meeting on the 12th, I think it was, of November, and we got through most of the CUP details in here. But didn't really cover the frequently asked questions, but those were really from two of the planning commissioners at that time when it was in front of them, as it was had been deferred, and then we had a little bit extra time to provide additional information. We've also provided here your comprehensive plan strategies as they relate to WNL directly, the definition of an educational facility, which is on the last page, and also 2 recommendations. And mind you, those recommendations are just observations from me as to how we can improve, but they don't really get to the larger question that I think are questions that you're dealing with, which are about institutional creep, how to potentially handle that, and also to see if anything is needed in either the comprehensive plan amendment or even a zoning ordinance amendment, if you see fit to make changes in leading up from this discussion. So here for any questions if you have any.
Thank you, sir.
I think there's been some question around whether parking is a consideration or not. Just in general, for the conditions of issuance. Would parking fall under D, adequate public services, including streets and other traffic utilities, police, fire protection, are reasonably will be available to support the proposed uses? Is it a consideration? I don't know if for legal counsel if there's case law on that or not.
Not to give you a snarky answer, but I think it's how you interpret it. So you have wide latitude on how you interpret each of these criteria and whether or not they impact or are impacted by the proposed use. For parking, and I think I mentioned this last time, I'll just reiterate, because we don't have a parking requirement downtown, it's really difficult for staff to recommend that we come up with a condition that deals with parking since we don't have that requirement. So it's counter to what we already have in the code for the C1 zoning district. I think last time there was also a discussion of if the density increases, so there are more people in the building, then we have to be concerned with that additional parking. And how do we handle that extra demand when we think that there's already some sort of issue with parking? I'd like to just add an observation going back through more recently, because we've had these other parking discussions recently, reviewed the 2010 parking study, which is the most recent we have, which is admittedly a little bit dated. But some of the numbers in there, we have 800 and some parking spaces downtown public that's on street and off street in lots that we own or lease. And then there's another 200 and some. So there's about 1,100 parking spaces. And when they did a study, again, this is 2009, 2010, that they did a 1-day survey of all the spaces. And of all the spaces that were used at the highest point or the peak of the day, and they also had a fudge factor in because you always want about 10% additional spaces so that people can actually move around and not be stuck where they are. So even with all that counted up, there were still 200 additional spaces available. So, and I suspect we haven't had much change since 2010 to now, just as far as additional demand, perhaps a little bit, but not enough to do another study. All that said, I think we have enough cushion. We have enough parking. It's again about management.
Did that include the parking on North Main Street?
No, this was
No.
downtown specifically. The study was downtown proper. And I can't remember if the boundaries were any different than the C1 zoning district, but it would not have counted all the way out in North Main. And all the spaces, as I recall, on North Main can fit underneath or that are already there underneath the core physical training facility.
Okay.
I think it's a 1-for-1 basically underneath there. So that's not going to be a big impact. It will be impact BMI personnel, but perhaps not so much the rest of the city.
Thanks.
If I may just add, on my way up here, I was thinking of some some older Supreme Court cases that address special exceptions, special use permits, conditional use permits. Those are all the same thing. And what a governing body is supposed to be thinking about when they go through the process. And I pulled up
Jeremy, I'm going to lean in there because I want to make sure
yes, sir.
at least Camille can hear.
Gotcha. Pull up a case. The governing body may require certain uses which it considers to have a potentially greater impact upon neighboring properties or the public than those uses permitted in the district as a matter of right to undergo the special exception process. Each site is to be examined by public officials, guided by standards set forth in the ordinance for the impact the use will have if carried out on that site. Although the uses in such special exception categories are permissible under the ordinance, such permission is to be granted subject to such limitations and conditions as public officials may impose in order to reduce the impact of the use upon neighboring properties and the public to the level which would be caused by those uses permitted as a matter of right. So to your question, Nick, I do think you can consider traffic if a particular use of a parcel would have a greater impact because it would have greater traffic than other uses that may be permitted on that parcel as a matter of right. So I don't think there is a cabin set of core criteria you have to focus on. I think you look at the use, you look at the site, you then, with your guidance from your zoning officials, you look at how the site and the use is going to be impacted, how the public, the neighboring parcels are going to be impacted, and consider what conditions would be reasonable to curtail those impacts. And you could have, can't think of a hypothetical off the top of my head, but you could have a use that would cause increased traffic. You wanted to put a drive-through restaurant somewhere downtown, for example. Somebody drive through could create traffic. You may want to put a condition on somebody proposing such a use to eliminate that option.
So for example, if you had X facility and that facility had increased density from what its previous use, could you, as a condition, require some type of parking situation and that?
Depends on the specifics, but you could certainly consider it. I mean, probably take a significant increase in density. Sorry, Frank.
We can hear you fine. I just want to make sure
understand.
everybody else can as well.
So it's just kind of a case by case.
Oh, it's completely a case by case basis. And that's why the case speaks about studying the site, studying the use, and making a determination, based on the criteria in the ordinance, which are the factors, I guess, that Arnie keeps bringing up.
So Jeremy, the Supreme Court case that you referenced kept referring to the use.
Mhm.
Does the use include who is doing it?
Typically not.
Okay.
I take the position, if I have an applicant who has been a serial violator of zoning mandates on other locations, other sites, or some other past record of failing to perform or comply with the law, I think I can take that into consideration when considering that applicant's conditional use permit application. I don't know of any authority one way or the other on that issue, but it seems to me to be reasonable for a governing body to take that into consideration. I do think, particularly when you think about a Washington and Lee or a VMI or some other tax exempt uses, I do think impacts on revenue can be considered. I think so that may be tied to the user in some respects. But, if you had somebody who is going to deprive you of 50% of your tax base downtown, I do think city council could appropriately take that into consideration.
Which is in our comp plan, that of course. But if the use is going to be someone sitting at a computer typing,
Yes, yeah. If
Does
you're,
it
if
matter
you're talking about an
who
office
they are
building,
typing for, that
shouldn't.
Okay.
It should. If I have 10 people sitting, to Tom's point, if I have 10 people sitting in an office building that's in my law firm, that's one thing. And if I have 10 people in that office building that are in-house legal counsel for a large city institution, and that one is required to receive a conditional use permit, what's the impact difference? And then so maybe revenue, right? But what if it is because of tax base? Well, what if that is a lease situation where the owner of the property is leasing it to that institution? So you do still have real estate taxes. I'm not sure what the impact difference would be in that situation.
and
which would
so
merit-
similarly, if a building has increased density, which we know would cause more cars, do we take into account who owns the car? What kind of person owns the car, or is a car a car a car?
Generally, again, all issues would be fact specific, but generally a car is a car is a car. I mean,
Okay.
you could have a use which had catered to particular types of cars, or,
Okay.
cars that are unusually loud or larger. or
Domino's
something like that.
delivery.
Right, exactly. So there could be
Understood.
Some impacts that are a
Great.
little different, but.
This circles all back around to what Tom started with. It's not about the user, it's about the use. It's the
Yeah.
impact of the use and not the impact of the user. So I guess I'm having a hard time trying to understand why we're dwelling on conditional use when it focuses on the user and not the usage. Usage is like David just explained. If the impact of the use is detrimental to services, et cetera, then we need to change or examine our zoning and get that put forward instead of who is using the space. And
Can I just,
that's where I'm coming down on.
John, before you go, Leslie,
just one,
Did you have-
got a second?
Well, I don't mind if he goes first. I was gonna kind of piggyback on Chuck's, but go ahead.
I'll go ahead, Leslie, because mine is on parking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, and get into that point, it goes back, what Chuck's comments, it goes back to Tom's original question is should business administrative use be in a CUP? If we just pulled that out and put in caveat like we have with living space on the first floor, that you can't have living space on the frontage road. And if we did something like that with educational administrative facilities and then made it by right, I'd be okay with that as long as we could ensure that that was true only for a lease situation, so that we don't have the issue of losing revenue. And could we, I guess we could state that you can, but you may be able to lease space for that. But I don't know if that gets so complicated.
I was gonna say, but before you draft it, is that
Right.
something you would be comfortable conceptually approaching?
Conceptually, in this respect, I think you could do it. If owner, private entity, taxpayer comes to you and says, I would like a conditional use permit, and it's my intention to lease it to an entity that would be tax exempt, except that since I'm the owner, I'll be paying real estate taxes. Or to take it to another example, Washington and Lee and the city have a payment in lieu of tax agreement where they make certain payments in lieu of real estate taxes. If Washington and Lee were to own a piece of property and want to use it for a particular purpose, in either case, one option would be to use, and I know it's not anything we're terribly fond of, but the time limit you can impose on a conditional use permit. Say, okay, we're gonna do this now. We'll revisit it in 5 years. And so if for some reason the payment in lieu of tax agreement were to go away, you could withdraw the conditional use permit and try to get the property back on the tax rolls if the agreement were no longer in effect. That's the one way I could see you could try to do it, is to say, okay, and maybe it works better with the Washington and Lee example. You buy the building, you're going to use it for the educational business office space, whatever it may be. Essentially, as long as the city is receiving some payment from Washington and Lee in lieu of taxes, then we'd be able to use, they'd be able to continue to use. If it were to be removed from the tax base, then the conditional use permit could be withdrawn and it could be reverted back to private use, or tax paying use.
One thing to clarify, I agree with everything Jeremy said. I as I recall from the payment in lieu of taxes paper that Jen authored, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but in many ways, from our payment in lieu of taxes, it doesn't matter who owns the property, whether it's Washington Lee or a private entity. Washington Lee's commitment through the 1990 agreement and the updates to it is that anything from a moment in time forward, and we're in that forward period now, that they acquire, they make a payment in lieu of taxes equal to what the taxes would be. And that's, so in that way, it's no different from whether it's owned by another party who's a taxable entity. Our payment in lieu of taxes today has Washington Lee, since the 1990 agreement, paying full taxes on property off of campus that they've acquired.
And if they make improvements to it, do they pay taxes on the improvements or at the rate it was assessed at when they first purchased it.
The assessment changes over time.
It does, okay.
So it can go up or down as their property value goes up and down based on investment, disinvestment, or property value market changes.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked that because there's a common misconception that the taxes that are paid are based on the initial assessment and it's never reassessed, and therefore the pilot amount never changes on that property. So thanks for making that clear because that drives me crazy.
That's what drives you crazy.
One of the things that drives.
Okay.
Would a CUP be needed if Rockbridge County acquired another building on Main Street? Because that would go off the tax rolls and they would put office space there. And
I don't think under your zoning ordinance.
I don't
Arnie,
either.
you may
That's,
know.
it's,
Yeah, I don't
I know
believe
the
so.
answer. The answer is no. And so I bring that up also because it's about the use. And also our comp plan, we want to keep things on the tax rolls. So I'm just putting that out there. And I also think, for full disclosure, the fact that the planning commission will be considering a different CUP, not the one that we're talking about right now, is part of the conversation also. So that no, I mean, that if people are concerned about parking, that's very important to consider. Very, very important.
Before we segue into that, John, I just want to, I think there's some members of council that may have either been on the planning commission or on council when Cornerstone Bank developed the land that they're on right now in 2010. And there was a gift shop there that had a parking lot that you could pull into. There was a great deal of consternation and a CUP and proffers to be able to allow a drive-through for the bank because it was going to be a different flow and a different process for people coming and going off that property. So we do have an example. We can go back and revisit that and talk about that. Big piece there was public safety. Wells Fargo across the street had been there so long, people just accepted it, and that one arguably is more dangerous than the one that Cornerstone has, in my opinion. But we went through, city council went through a arduous process of looking and dealing with that CUP many, many moons ago. People take it for granted that it's there and that's the way it's always been. But prior to 2011, when Cornerstone opened in that location, it was not the case. But there was a parking lot that people access the property through off of Main Street. So
And it used to be a gas station before that, right?
correct.
A lot more traffic.
Yep.
Come a long way.
Parking, John.
Regardless of which way opinions about what's, we're only discussing the use. So a person, well, no matter which way that goes, parking still could be an issue. And so I think we're getting some clarification tonight, which wasn't, we were debating it in planning commission about, is parking under public services. So I think what I'm hearing is that parking does fall under public services. So then it goes back to an interesting point I think Arnie has brought up for me, and that is parking management. So a question, is it reasonable for us in evaluating a CUP to say, what is your parking management plan? And what is the net number of spaces that you think you may require? It's a question I asked when we were reviewing the Rockbridge building. And I asked, what is the net increase in the number of offices that will be in that building once it's renovated and occupied and leased to W&L? There wasn't an answer. When I asked, is there a parking plan? There was no answer. So I think that helped. I think it's important. The basic question I have is there a way that we can ask as part of the conditional use permit, what is your parking management plan?
I'll offer my opinion.
Please.
I think the answer is yes. You can ask that. Bear in mind, everything that Jeremy just mentioned about, or that the other discussion is involved. We're asking that of one person because a CUP is required, and we're not asking it for somebody else who has the exact same demand on parking. And because they're an identical use, just a different user. But to your question, I think the answer is yes, you can ask that. I think the challenge is you will have somebody who's going to offer an answer to that. And everyone expects them to fulfill that, what they say their parking plan is.
I think it's particularly helpful to know when the density increases. If the density seems to be about the same, that may not be as relevant. But I think if the density is increasing, I think it is helpful to know about parking management. For example, with the VMI alumni one that came through, they did mention what their plans for parking were when that I don't believe that office space was really
Vacant.
yeah, it was vacant. So it did increase the density.
Vacant now.
Vacant now.
There was a time when there were probably no less than 10 offices and employees working upstairs. It was a
Yeah.
point in time in the past,
But
but
point taken.
Yeah.
But I think when under the current circumstances, things are changing, I think it is helpful to know
sure.
what the plan may be.
But that is also hard because you did ask that question. You did end up getting a response saying
Right.
about increase of 5 in that building, and things change over time. And then the Rockbridge building used to have a lot of offices in it. For a time, it hasn't had anything.
Right.
So it does make it tricky to answer that question. I think it still comes back to, we have plenty of parking downtown. It may not be on Main Street. You know what? My preference is it not be on Main Street. I want people to park at least a block away. So it's kind of like the grocery store situation where you're wanting to go to one shop, but you have to walk by the others to get there. And on your way there, you might see a trinket or a cup of coffee or a book that you want. And so you're not just going parking in front of the store you want to go to and just frequenting that place, but now you're walking by, getting the foot traffic to the other stores, and you may end up shopping at several of them. I mean, that's what we want. We want foot traffic. So I don't care if people can't find a parking spot on Main
I
Street.
think
If
it-
they can find it
Hold on,
elsewhere
Nick. Hold
downtown.
on, Mr. Smith.
If we're gonna keep on the parking question, and I missed the third meeting, so I didn't get the chance to ask, but has Arnie, have you heard, or Tom, you heard, or Chief isn't here, I can't ask her, if anybody who has been participating in these meetings has specifically said, I have customers coming in that say they couldn't come in because later on, I couldn't find a parking spot. I did experience that firsthand because there's no parking on the other side of the street where I was. So I did experience that firsthand, but a dedicated customer isn't going to abandon their purchasing because they can't find a parking space. I guess that's when you rub it all out. If a business is teetering on the brink because we're going to take out a parking space, if it's not that, it's going to be something else. And that's my opinion on it. And I'm sure there are others that will disagree on that, but I'm still curious if we've had business owners say specifically that I have customers coming in that say they couldn't find a place to park, so they just kept on going.
The answer is yes. I heard that from Lex Runnings.
Okay.
And the answer to that question was given in October, and it's changed positively, I think, since the parking enforcement, as we know from the data, slacked off a little bit in August and September. And she just answered that question. Unfortunately, yes, but it's changed, it's gotten better.
So better management and enforcement has
Yes.
swung the needle.
So parking enforcement is better. That's what you're hearing from the,
Yes.
okay.
Unequivocally.
And I think that's something that is absolutely important to consider. I mean, because it is, again, enforcement is a police service. So since it's improved, I think that that's something that to consider. I think but I will say in terms of like where the parking is available, on some level, I think it's, some people might want to park right in front of the shop. Some people might not want to, and they'll walk around. It's probably just really a case by case
But
basis.
I'm sorry, we're not talking about shops. We're talking about people that are going to be sitting in their offices for 8 hours a day.
But
I'm just trying to distinguish
but
between.
we're
the
we're
discussion
talking
here.
about the effect of people sitting in the offices on the shop. Like it's it's going to have an effect or no effect on the shops, right? Because if people are in the parking spaces, then maybe they're taken up. But if parking enforcement is doing well, then those people are going to be moving. They're not going to be sitting, So I think I think things change over time. And like personally, how I look at things, if parking enforcement is well, and we're not having the same problems we were having before, then that's a change in circumstance.
And I think it's important because I think we may have inadvertently sent a message that we're concerned about increased density downtown. To the contrary, I hope is the message that our council is putting out there, because for a decade, we've been begging second floors to be developed. We want increased density. That's why cities are what cities are. Where the city services are. That's our claim to fame, that you can live downtown and that the density of Lexington, Virginia can still sustain you 7 days a week practically. So that to say that we're concerned about density increasing, I'm not. I would like to continue to have people working and living downtown personally. That seems to be what creates a thriving city.
And I just pile on, and then I'm going to call on Ms. Alexander, pile on. I think our comprehensive plan has identified we want more utilization of the buildings downtown, and we want more people downtown. I think it's much more eloquently stated, but that, if we are abandoning that, and perhaps arguably through prior votes and language, the council has indicated they do want to abandon that. And part of the reason for the conversation tonight is to firm up and give staff clear direction. Either we need to update our comprehensive plan and strategic plan and things that we want to see downtown, or have a good path forward. Ms. Alexander.
I just wanted to add on to something Arnie said when he was talking about the parking plan that was done in 2010, I believe. And if there have been things that have happened downtown since then that add to the demand for parking. We have the Robert E. Lee Hotel, we have Cornerstone, we have now the Bank of the James, we have the Georges, and all the changes that have been made in those ends to add more rooms. And the more rooms you add, the more need there is for parking. Now, some of those have their own parking, but then when people are kind of in and out, they may not go around the block to park. They might want to park right in front of where they're residing for the weekend, and then run in for a couple of hours and come back. For the overnight, they probably go to the parking spaces reserved for them. So there are some additional demands that have taken place since 2010 that need to be considered. There are lots of residences downtown as well.
I'm not opposed to greater density downtown. I just think that parking and or public transportation needs to grow as density increases. We might not be at that point, but I do think it's a key consideration to just be aware of as things move forward.
So again, I just go back without taking a position, is asking what is, when we're evaluating a CUP and the planning commission, is it reasonable to ask what is the potential parking impact? Is it a reasonable question?
I think the attorney said yes.
So
And you can take a position. That's perfectly fine.
if
Hold on just a second. I would love to have council members respond to the city manager's statement of this being a restrictive code that we may want to eliminate.
Yes.
If you have no opinion, please state that. If you have an opinion, I'd love to hear that.
Have an opinion.
Yes, John.
We all have opinions,
I know we do.
like belly button.
No, I think it's been a very valid question that's come up among council members about, are we just speaking of the use and what's the difference between a person typing who has, works for an accounting firm or works for, the university. But I go back to, well, why did the CUP process in 2017, did we put this conditional use process in place for educational uses in the C1? Part of the logic, I'm trying to understand that because now we've had 4 cases where in the downtown, so we have the courthouse is a long-term lease, Rockbridge Building's a long-term lease, mailroom is a long-term lease, and the second floor of the James is the short-term swing space. So those are 4 that we have downtown. So what was the rationale for putting it in place in 2017? And then that's one question. Second question that goes back to the use issue. WNL has a master plan and an institutional overlay. Within that, they're supposed to accommodate their uses within the campus or take care of externalities like parking. They're supposed to have a parking plan. They built a parking garage. So in a way, it goes back to what we're wrestling with is, does WNL, as the reason we have this institutional overlay to, and now we're allowing that overlay to indirectly come into the downtown. Do they have the same, well, technically, no. Practically, yes.
You're either pregnant or you're not. So, but Arnie's prepared to respond to your question, having been here in 2017.
At least the first one. Learning from our courthouse project, there was a definition, no, sorry, there was a use for private school that was in the previous zoning ordinance, and that required a conditional use permit downtown. The unfortunate thing is it did not have a definition that went along with private school, so we had to make interpretations. In the update, I can only assume that we needed additional definitions, so therefore it morphed from private school to educational facility, and actually to 2 educational facilities, because we have educational facility, primary, secondary, and educational facility, college, university, and that remained a conditional use permit. So I think it was just a transition from private school to these educational facility definitions while remaining a conditional use in the C1 zoning district. Now, the second question I think we've already covered before, in the sense that our overlay applies to WNL's campus, and when they do something that's not within the overlay, then our zoning ordinance applies, and that's why we have the conditional use permit. So that's the technical answer, that wherever you are, whatever your zoning and or overlay district is what applies. Downtown, there's not an overlay, there's a historic overlay, but that's different.
I will add back on 2017, the other consideration was the tax exemption, was that we wanted to be able to control that. Leasing wasn't really a problem, but I hadn't heard, and I don't know if, at the time people knew that we could write that in somehow into the code itself.
So again, then one of the debates we're having is whether we want to continue to have the conditional use permit for educational uses in the downtown, or as Leslie said earlier in the comments, modify the definition.
Yeah, I heard the city manager questioning the validity and the benefit of discriminatory practices, because if you are an accountant or bookkeeper or administrative assistant in a proposed building, if you work for anyone other than Washington Lee or VMI, there's no conditional use. It is discriminatory towards those two. But
I mean, it's I don't know that it's necessarily discriminatory. I mean, but
my word, not I'm not coming before the judge.
but I mean, but I guess we have other areas of the code where things are not all treated exactly the same. You know what I mean? We had a big discussion about accessory dwelling units, where you can have a short-term rental where you have 4 people in there, but you can't have in an accessory dwelling unit, but you can't have 4 people living there on a long-term lease. So this isn't the only area where we have, maybe some differentiation.
No question. And we'll debate that, perhaps, bring that up for additional debate. But for tonight's purposes, looking at, I'm going to go back. I try and boil things down to what makes sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. We can agree to disagree. But fundamental goals are for our downtown to be thriving. And we've identified in our comprehensive plan to have greater utilization of buildings. We have had no discussion about the building owners who refuse to put in anything of water, or fire suppression, or the concept of public safety in their buildings, and being good landlords and maintaining their buildings, because we have some buildings downtown that aren't looking so good. But we want to have greater utilization of the upper floors. We want to maintain our retail, and we want to have more people hustling and bustling downtown. We don't get to decide what their socioeconomic circumstance is or what they look like, nor should we. I'll remind those who haven't been here for 25 plus years, as I have. 20 or so years ago, we were really concerned about Washington and Lee moving on to their campus and drawing up the bridge and not interacting with downtown. Main Street Lexington's done a great job of getting students downtown with the Get Downtown effort every spring. It's fun to see students in their role and talk to them about that experience, which they all have been very favorable of. So having those opportunities and working to that end, it fits with our goals. So when I look at this CUP to say, you know what, we've got somebody that owns a building, they want to utilize their second floor, and they want to help us achieve our goals of having more people downtown and utilizing the second floors, and we're saying no, or we don't like who you're going to have in there, is a grave concern that I have. And it undermines what I believe our goals are from that standpoint. If we want to send a message, if council wants to send a message to the property owners of the various buildings that we're not collaborative and we're abandoning these goals, I think that's fine. Staff needs to know, as they have people coming in saying, what can I do with my building? What the rules of engagement are and how to proceed. And that's the real goal for this conversation and as we move forward. None of it's etched in stone. It ebbs and flows, as does our downtown. But I know we all want to see it continue to be thriving and vibrant. There are so many businesses that have opened up that I've thought, oh my gosh, how are they ever going to make it? Fortunately for them, they have the spirit and the passion and the energy to make it successful. And we see that again and again and again. And thus we've got lots of buildings occupied with the retail. But upstairs, we need to have a path forward of how to help owners revitalize our 100-plus-year-old buildings and have, if you can leave the door open since it's a public meeting. Thank you. But I'll step off my soapbox. I believe that the CUP is modestly, is not accomplishing what we're looking to do. And I embrace the city manager's statements. And part of that being perhaps to sit down with Washington Lee and VMI and have some collaborative conversations of what their expectations are and how we can move forward together. Because when we start splitting hairs and worse, speaking at one another, they're not successful and not positive outcomes, in my opinion. It's not hard to be a good neighbor. It's great when you can share a meal. It's even better when you're speaking to one another, as I've declared many times before. we're rapidly approaching our regular time.
Can I just get in one?
Absolutely. We got about 3 or 4 more minutes.
I, I think if you pull together all the questions and the comments and things here, you start to get a pattern that says, this is really what our vision of downtown is and what we want it to be and what the comprehensive plan says. So then my question is, how do the universities fulfill that vision, contribute to fulfilling that vision? In a way, I've been thinking about, I want to change the question. I don't want to say what is institutional creep anymore. I want to say, how is it that we start to fulfill that vision of what we want our downtown to be, which is laid out in the comp plan in lots of places. So I think your idea of having a discussion is a very good one. There are models for doing that, memorandums of understanding between universities and their towns on how they want to manage this engagement in the engagement zone of the downtown. I think that's a worthy place to explore. Otherwise, we keep going every time, one by one, and beating ourselves up over, is it this, is it that, is it parking? I think if that was in place, 60 or 70% of the discussion would be sorted, and then you're dealing with 30% of the particular issues for a building. Thank you.
Any other comments from council members? Ms. Alexander?
Just thinking perhaps the terminology institutional creep is not the right terminology because it's not about institution, it's about the use. And perhaps the use, what's happening is the use may not be contributing to the vitality that the formers of the downtown enhancement plan had envisioned, or what the comp plan may have envisioned. It might be the vision for some to feel that the offices increase the vitality, but for others it may not. So it's not necessarily institutional. It could be creep from any type of use. If it over uses the spaces in any situation. If we had a downtown where there was nothing but farmers markets and fresh produce places, then we would be upset about that because we wouldn't have a place for clothing stores, shoe stores, gift shops, things like that. So it depends on what the use is, not whether it's the institution or whether it's a bank or whatever.
Anything else for the good of the cause? I would just say, not so eloquently, I believe it's really important for us. We've got a great staff, we've got great ordinances, and we need to figure out how to support business owners, property owners to be as successful as they possibly can. Not rolling over to anybody, not kowtowing to anybody, but making it easy for people to be successful. I think that will pay in spades. We've had some not so positive experience with our VDOT and Spotswood properties, and the process and the time it took, and how this council and our community treated Echelon. It wasn't very neighborly, in my opinion. You can take me to task in public or after, your choice, but that's my opinion. I think it's important for this council to set a tone for our community that we do welcome and want businesses to be successful, not at any cost, but within the confines of the rules that we have. And if we find ourselves needing to modify our rules along the way, I think that's prudent. And it shows character and strength to be able to pivot when it's appropriate. If it's not, both of our universities have honor codes. You don't lie, cheat, or steal. It's pretty good tenets to run on. Our code can be modified, but we keep those basic tenets of values, of integrity, and respect. So I've said many times before, it's an honor and privilege for me to serve with you all. You all are very thoughtful, very pragmatic. And as we move beyond on this topic and move on to our regular meeting at 7, I know we will have great success and serve our community well. With that, I'd like to adjourn our work session. I have 6:54 and ask you to be the old cheeks in the seats at 6:58. Take a break. And for those who are just coming in, we are in a work session that we've just concluded, and we will start our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. If you intend to speak to council this evening, I ask you to sign up ahead of time, please.
If you have anything to add.
Good evening, sir.
Since we don't have much gym space, dodgeball. That was a good presentation.
See.
Yeah. I'm glad we all got to hear it. That was key.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is the appointed hour of 7 o'clock on the first Thursday of February. Welcome one and all. Before I call the meeting to order, I would like to read a couple of comments regarding tonight's meeting. I will remind everyone that public comments are always welcome, and I invite you to sign up over here on our sign-up sheet if you wish to speak this evening. I will recognize those signed up during the citizens' remarks section of City Council's agenda. And during this agenda item, I ask that these guidelines be followed. Number one, once recognized to speak, please come forward, stand at the podium, and for the record, state your name and if you are a resident of Lexington, Virginia. If you want to be contacted after our meeting, please provide your contact information to our clerk. Number two, please make your comments to the council as a whole and do not engage the audience. We ask that you please be brief, state your position, and provide facts. Please provide written statements and/or supporting materials to the clerk for distribution to the council and the city manager. Debate is prohibited. This is a time for you to share your thoughts and ideas with city council. Lastly, please speak clearly as we want to hear what you have to say. The council allots 3 minutes to each speaker, and individuals may not yield their allotted time to another person. If you represent a group, you are allotted 5 minutes, and you're invited to identify other members of your group who are in attendance. I remind us all that the meetings of the City Council are formal proceedings and are recorded. And with that, I would like to call the meeting to order. And our first item of business, if you all please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. And from the large and youthful look of the crowd, I anticipate there's a journalism class that's visiting. Welcome. Appreciate you being here. Be careful. You could fall victim as Doug Harwood has, and after a number of decades is still attending meetings as a journalist. And we're thankful that you all are here and that he is here. If you do have questions, council members and myself and city manager staff are all available, and our information's on the website, so feel free to reach out to us. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the agenda. I'm not aware of any changes or modifications, and unless there's an objection, we will approve the agenda as presented. Hearing no objections, it is approved. Next, presentations this evening. I'd like to invite Eric Wilson with the Rockbridge Historical Society to bring us a minute in history.
Good evening, all. This is the first time I've showed up to speak anywhere with football, but I will not throw it. It's light on air, and I don't want anyone confusing me with Tom Brady. So I'm gonna leave that there, but I will explain it and why that's particularly special this weekend in our community. So there's a simple, broad question I want to pose to all of us here, including the audience. And it's one we're going to be posing to every middle school student at Lilburn Downing in the next week and a half. And the question is, what's in your trophy case? And while we think about what that might mean in a specifically material, physical sense, in a broader metaphorical, personal, aspirational sense, the related question might be, what would you want to be in your trophy case? Or for the middle schoolers, if they come back in 25 years into the building, what would they want to show somebody? What would they want to show as some marker of memory in their time? So we ask, what are trophies in that sense? Where's the case? How are they earned? Who with? What value do they still hold today? These are questions for historians, of course. What are the markers of memory? Why and for whom do we preserve them? But again, I want us to think about this broadly, and there's an invitation for you here for all council members and staff and the school board on February, it's 3 days, February 14th, 18th, and 19th. School administration has asked me and colleagues and others to do a program where every middle school classroom, every history classroom gets a presentation about school history, both in terms of the pre-desegregation histories from 1927 to 65, those 38 years, but the now, 60 years since then. The school will turn 100 in 2 years. Lexington High School, well, the building of Lexington High School turns 100 next year. So these are opportune times to think about the physical and the community dimensions of these things. So if you're interested in what we have on offer, I'm happy to follow up with you, but basically those mornings of that Friday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Here, you're familiar with some of these histories. Vice Mayor and I have worked together on a number of these, and last September we presented that statewide to the history and influence of the school. And that built off projects that we've done annually with these students that build off things, that build off documents, but also build off the oral histories of people and family who've attended. And I know we've got at least 2 people on staff who attended the school on different times, and maybe more parents, people who've taught in the school. And we want that all to be part of the history as well. So we want students to think about history not just as this sepia photograph thing, something that looks like this and looks old, which it is, and that's an important documentary record. But if we can also get them thinking about, teamwork, okay, legacy. I'm going to shift here to the things themselves quickly. We're going to start with football. It's Super Bowl weekend, right? And this year specifically, it's the 50th anniversary of, how to put this, the only person from Rockbridge to have won a Super Bowl, Steve Davis, in 1975, Super Bowl IX. I liked the Steelers then. I don't so much now, but they let the Vikings have it. In 2016, okay, the NFL sends balls to every Super Bowl champion to 3 figures, to the competitor, to the winner, to their high school coach, and to their high school. Okay, here's the thing. Steve Davis played for 2 Lexington high schools, neither of which exist anymore. He played 2 years of Lilburn Downing Trojans football, 1963 to 65. When the school desegregated, he played at 66, 67 as a Scarlet Hurricane, talented enough to be recruited to Delaware State, drafted as a running back for the Steelers, and within 3 years, he's a Super Bowl champion, and moving on. This is all but invisible in our school. It's in the entry trophy case, but students, when I've asked, like, have you seen this? Do you know what it is? They're like, I don't know. It's football, which is true. But the point of it is, how can we make that live more broadly? This photo, 1948, Lilburn Downing football team, 3 years after World War ends, 4 years after Black students in Rockbridge are finally allowed to earn high school degrees at that school. This is the year Davis was born. Okay, so they are 1 school generation ahead of him. When we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, as Newton says, we have lots of giants. We have lots of influences. These young men, who knows, maybe some of the coaches were still coaching, wouldn't surprise me then, are part of that legacy. And our students are surprised. We had a football team, we had a baseball team, and we could talk about the reasons why these things change or don't change over time. But these are good catches. And to ask them to think about what teams you would want to have at your school or what you value. If you asked me for a school trophy case, I'm asking myself, what would you want? Many of those things are in the alumni room next door. Okay. This is not from that. This is from the Historical Society archives. You may have seen it. This is a trophy. It's a newspaper article, but these are I think it's 123 signatures of families, parents, neighbors who wanted to open a new Black school to replace the overcrowded school on Randolph Street. So yes, it's kind of a dusty, fraying piece of newspaper, but it's a trophy because they won, and they won it against really difficult odds, right? So to have that in the context of other kinds of achievements, and to say, what does group work, teamwork in those settings mean, can be quite powerful. If we loop ahead, what you see when you walk into Lilburn Downing, as well as the picture of the Reverend himself, will be a trophy case where things start in the 1990s. There is a gap that we haven't been able to solve really between 1965 and 1990. It's also shared with a lot of the high schools. It seems to be a casualty of consolidation, renovations, but a lot of the literal trophies, right, those keepsakes have gone somewhere or nowhere. But, you know, here we have 2011, the band, was it Miracle on Main Street, right? This is when like trophies actually look kind of nice, right? Not the plastic things with, you know, the same figure and they just changed the ball. We've got a lot of, you know, Latin accomplishments, chess club, team pictures, right? The notion of what that might be has broadened and can still broaden. And I think part of the point we want to take up with students is not just what you would want of your accomplishments there, but what in the school would be worth recording, whether in a case, on the walls. Our students are probably more adept now at digital means of preserving these kinds of things. We want to learn from them as much as we want to educate them and challenge them in these things. So we're excited to try this new initiative, right? Comprehensively working with every student. And our vice mayor is recording some of the reflections that she's done before. Our mayor is going to come and share some thoughts with the civics classes and his time in their decades as well. And we'd love to see you as well at this enterprise. This is what you support in our school system. There's other school work to be done with the high schools, the elementary schools ahead. We think this is a good foundation to see how it works and what we can be inclusive about and to keep and to preserve. Enjoy the Super Bowl too.
Thank you, Eric. I think that gap that you're talking about may also have been around the time the internet started, and now we have Instagram. So who knows what things will go into the cases. But thank you for being with us this evening, and thanks for sporting the Lilburn Downing colors with your orange and black. Looking good. Looking good. Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is a presentation from Davenport on our bond ratings and planned bond issuance. I'd like to invite and welcome David Rose. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. There's an old saying my late father used to say, when you're explaining, you're losing. And we have very little explaining to do. I understand that the manager has sent out information to everyone that our foray into getting credit ratings for the city has been very successful. And I'd just like to just talk a few moments tonight about why and what it means. We also have a handout tonight of the time schedule going forward. So I've asked Jen, and I think it's appropriate as she does that, because we wouldn't be here tonight. I wouldn't be here tonight on behalf of the folks at Davenport. We are fortunate to be your financial advisor without your staff. So between the city manager and Jen there and the mayor, all three, and others that I'm not going to also name, we spent many hours over many weeks putting together and explaining what makes the city of Lexington so unique. And the bottom line was these big national rating agencies located up in New York City that don't really care very much about places in Virginia. They're big city folks. They turned around and said, you know what? We see what's special. We also think that this is a city that is creditworthy and more than creditworthy. AA ratings for each in the middle of that category. And by the way, I've got all the write-ups and all the details for you and anyone else, and I will ask, again, the staff to hand them out. But what you have in front of you, as you know, as part of keeping this city healthy and vibrant, and I'm glad I was able to listen to a few minutes of the presentation prior to coming tonight, was talking about continuing to make Lexington so dramatic and so impressive. And part of that is reinvestment. And so we are planning to go to market thanks to your decisions with the capital program. Also, some good fortuitous results in terms of getting bids that were very solid and strong. So the timing is there. The situation we think is right. And as a result, with this schedule, which goes back to early January, we are planning, if things hold in there, if you look at the second page, to sell bonds in the middle of March and then close basically by the end of March. Like I said, this is a situation where the city has the wherewithal to make those payments. It's been part of your plan. And as a result of all that, we look forward to doing that. We will be selling these bonds into the competitive marketplace, which means that we will handle the markets, but anyone and everyone can buy these bonds as long as they're basically a registered investor going through major brokerage firms. And that's how it works. It's called a competitive process. So we have no idea who's going to win that, but we expect to see very robust bidding on that. The beauty of all that is it's fully transparent. The staff and ourselves will be on this electronic monitoring, if you would, at one moment in time. It'll usually be about 11 in the morning. We will say anyone and everyone that's bona fide, you can buy all the bonds. You can't buy part of it, all the bonds. Then you can then redistribute them as you want. The lowest interest rate all in is going to be the winner. We have done some planning. When we did all this, we do it at interest rates that are right now considerably above what we think the actual interest rate will be. Again, it's interesting for those of you maybe in the audience or some of you in front of me, it's not been a great environment to try to buy or get a mortgage. Those interest rates have been up lately. Interestingly, though, the world that you're borrowing in is a codicil, if you would, of the Treasury Department. It's been around since the 1930s, and that is you can borrow on a tax-exempt basis, and those interest rates are very strong. So we anticipate looking at your long-term borrowing, fixed rate, somewhere in the middle threes. That's what we think we're going to be looking at. We budget considerably higher, but again, we think for the moment that it could be that strong. And that it was someone like myself, when I came out of school in 1982, that long-term interest rate was up at 15%. So again, to be all in at around 4%, I think that's a big win. And even if rates should go lower, chances not, but even over time, we see rates evolve. We're going to have the ability to refinance this. We, meaning the city, we're also going to have that ability that you decide if you want to refinance. We are talking about fixing these rates so that if something should happen in the next 10 or 20 years, it's not like it's getting reset. And that's not something that you have to worry about. And we're very conservative that way. That was a conscious decision made with staff. I don't think it was a very difficult decision to come to. Just make a couple points here. There are 3 national rating agencies, 4 local governments, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. We ended up seeking ratings from the first 2. They are really sort of the number 1 and number 2 agencies. We call them agencies, even though they're private individual businesses. You'll notice their commentary, and their commentary basically goes like this. They really are both about the same. Number 1, the city has what we call a structurally balanced budget, which is to say that year in and year out, you bring in more revenues or enough revenues to take care of recurring expenditures. That's very important, number 1. Number 2, you have a very robust, we call it rainy day fund. Technically, it's got a term unassigned fund balance. That's an accounting term. I just call it the rainy day fund. It is monies that are available And sometimes folks in the audience wonder, well, why do you have all this? Because those dollars earn an interest rate higher than our borrowing rate, and they go back into the general fund and help keep the pressure on your budgets down. And they also allow us to borrow money in the mid to high threes or whatever the market may be at that time. The next reason they like the city is because, again, you've got very strong and very heavily concentrated entities in Washington Lee and VMI. So they look very favorably upon both of those institutions, which, by the way, also enjoy credit ratings that are very solid. So that, again, is a positive. What is a negative, though, is just your size. They actually say if something bad should happen, how do you disperse that? It's a relatively modest size government, and you can't change that. You know, Charlottesville is in the same mode. Williamsburg, where I was yesterday, and we work with them, they're in the same mode. And yet at the same time, it's why both of those places, which we work with, have very strong fund balances. So you have the ability, if something bad happens, to really weather that storm more so than perhaps a larger county wouldn't have that level of reserves. Finally, they talk about debt and liabilities. And what I mean by that is they talk about not just the debt you have outstanding, the debt you're going to do, which we're talking about here, but they also look at pensions and OPEB. The good news, when they compare you to what we call best practices and they lump all those three together, they view you as if you were literally a AAA, the highest you can be in terms of all of those liabilities. The debt itself is more on a AA level, which is what you are at, but your overall levels are very strong. They call those the fixed costs. That's what you'll see in the report, and you're going to see that. That's very strong. I'm happy to answer any questions. I probably spent more time than I should, but I don't know if the city manager wants to add anything, or finance director, or Jen. Fine.
Members of council have questions for David.
With the selling of the bonds, is it just like a bidding process where, okay, and then the lowest bid?
That's
wins?
exactly what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happens is, and that begs the question, what was it cost, for example? They build that in to their interest rate, and we're able to figure that out afterward. But all we care about, the way the bidding works under the rules of the securities laws, we don't care if they charge $1 or charge $100. What the all-in is, the all-in interest rate, it's like a car loan. They have that truth in lending, the APR. All we care is that what's that all-in cost, which ties directly to what is the all-in debt service we're going to pay. So you will actually see, Tom and Jen will see electronically, it'll be whatever the lowest all-in cost of money is for the whole loan. Fixed rate. They have to meet the parameters. And that's how it works. But then we'll report back to you, certainly, which we will do. And it's a public knowledge, it's public information, of course. So we'll tell you who bought it and what happened.
Thank you.
Tom.
Just a couple things while David is here, and thank you for that, Mr. Rose. At your next meeting, our intention is to bring forward resolution to authorize the issuance of not to exceed $23 million in municipal loans and not to exceed, I believe it's 5.5% interest rate. And I thought it'd be good if you have questions about that, you could direct them to Mr. Rose here this evening. When council approves as the governing body, how much we're going to borrow, sometimes there could be reasons why we would want to issue a little bit more or a little bit less debt. And of course, the interest rates vary not only daily, but throughout the day. So when you have a not to exceed, it's a standard practice when it comes to issuing municipal debt. And perhaps it would be advantageous for Mr. Rose to describe that a little bit. But just as you recall, we're planning to issue $22.5 million of debt. And we've been modeling this at a 4.5% interest rate. We're not even sure that it's going to actually be 22.5 million. Jen and I may have a conversation that would even lower that number a little bit more, but it just want you to understand that at your next meeting, the numbers are going to be a little higher, 5.5 and 23 million. And perhaps it would be helpful, David, if you could just describe how that's standard practice.
Thank you, Tom. So again, the reason the number can be higher is that, think of it this way. When any of us go into a store, there is a price for something we want to purchase. When it comes to municipal bonds, and I mentioned earlier that concept of tax exemption, that's an important point because the buyers of those bonds and the way they buy those bonds, sometimes they will actually pay a little bit less than that, let's call it that sticker price. And so we will then sometimes have to issue some more bonds. You may say, oh, that sounds like a bad thing or it's expensive. Well, what the flip side is, when they do it that way, the interest rate is going to be even lower than what I just told you. But the all-in APR could be in that mid threes. So bond math is a little complex. It's not just you buy it at what we call par. Sometimes it could be that way. Now, that happens and we've get the parameters set up that way. But sometimes, and in this environment, usually it's the other way. Sometimes what will happen is we will actually have someone say, okay, if the sticker price is 22 million, I'm going to give you 22.5 million. Why? Because in turn, then we can issue less bonds and we in turn get what that's called a premium. And then the interest rate that they ask for, then we have to calculate, it's going to be a little higher to the city because you're going to get a premium, not going to have to issue as much bonds. Now, I'm sure I've thoroughly confused you all, but it's something that we can certainly give you in writing and produce it. It's bond math. Only took me about a year and a half to figure it out, but that was luckily I figured it out, I think. But on a serious note, we don't know what we're going to get. Interestingly enough, so I mentioned tax exemption. When it comes to doing taxable bonds, which is not what we're doing, that's higher rates, those are actually sold at par because there's not this concept of tax exemption and ways in which an investor might do better or worse when it comes to their taxation. So it's a little more complex, but that's what we're in the business for. But again, I think Councilman Betts asked me, when it all gets done, we'll be able to give you a full report. We can show you that bond math. That'll be easy to put up on a screen. You'll be able to follow that. And you'll see exactly what you're paying because it's going to be fixed for the next, 20 years or what we're going to do there. So that's how it works.
And one thing to add on to that, David, is if we did this January 13th, the 10-year treasury is at 4.8%. And that's a marker of sorts. As the close of business today, it's at 4.42. So need that range because interest rates on a daily basis can fluctuate. So
yes, when I walked in
exceed.
and when y'all were going through the meeting, I said to Jen, I said, you know what? Rates are coming down, tax exempt rates, and that's a good thing. Now it could go back. Again, we're still, several weeks away, but they have been trending. But still, that's the taxable side. So if you think about it, as I said earlier, because of the way the world of tax exemption works, typically, not always, but typically tax exempt rates are lower than taxable rates. And so that's why I feel like if things hold steady, we would see this all in being somewhere probably in the mid to high threes in terms of interest rate. So we'll see. But again, as Tom pointed out, if it's in that 5.5 or higher, then the market, we don't do the financing. We hold off on it. And so again, there could be things that happen. And we might even say to ourselves, look, again, we set this up in such a way that we always can refinance it down the road. That's how it's set up. Because I would be disappointed if we're on the higher end, Mayor, in that range. But again, we'll
see what March brings. Mr. Ziegler.
And feel free to answer this in very simple terms so that I can understand it. But in the past, when we've borrowed, let's say for utility projects, and we've guaranteed the debt with our utility funds, our revenue from the utilities. And when we've borrowed for building a school, we've borrowed against our tax revenue that we collect. And so in this instance where we're issuing debt and we've gone out and gotten our own credit rating, and I understand the value of that, we're borrowing potentially $23 million for both utility projects and capital building projects. And what makes it even unique is that one of those capital building projects is one that we're taking the lead on, and we we will be reimbursed for a portion of those costs from some other partners. And so is there a simple way to just kind of explain how we're in a much better situation to do it this way, one lump sum, getting that credit rating? It costs some money to get the credit rating, but in the long run versus how we borrowed just a few years ago, piecemeal, utility here and so on, why this is good for the city of Lexington.
I appreciate it, Mr. Sigler. So number one, by having this credit rating, investors know that in effect, the full faith and credit of the city, all the dollars that you bring in, particularly the general fund, will be there for all of these bonds. To your point, though, we expect that there will be the side agreements with the other local governments, what have you, as well, that will pay their respective shares. We feel good, by the way, that they'll pay those shares. Otherwise, they kind of get themselves in a mode where they get shut out of the credit markets, as we call it. So they really have every incentive in the world, let alone to be able to use that facility. So that's number one. Number two, there is the economies of scale. If we were to do this in little piecemeal parts, some of the investors that will be there for us would not be there for us. They have to do just as much credit review and planning for buying your bonds at 22 million as they would if they had to buy 7 million or 4 million or, another 8 here or there. And so what happens is some of these investors that we're going to see, I will promise you, I may be wrong, but I think I'm going to be right. There are going to be some big names. There's going to be some big financial institutions that are going to be interested in buying. And because you've hit what I'll call a size that is substantial enough, it will be worth their while to go in and to bid on this, and then to turn around and be able to, in effect, resell these in $1 million increments or close to it. That's important. And that means something for them because, again, their time is limited and valuable. And so I think that's going to help as well. Lastly, important, the utility portion that we have here is still set up in such a way that those, we call them user fees, the users' rates and charges, those will still be going towards the payment of that particular portion of bonds. However, think of it this way, there's a backstop, and that's the overarching cities, if you would, cities funds that are there in the event, even though we're not worried about that. And if you recall, part of it, that's the other thing I didn't mention, the rating agencies pointed out that you not only have very good policies, but you've also amended and added and strengthened your policies. They point that out in here. And they talk about that with regard to enterprise fund, as we call it, utilities. They mentioned that. So we've got what we like to call in our business belt and suspenders for these financings. So we feel good about it. And like I said, I remember we were here, not in this particular building, but we were over, I think, at the police station prior to Mr. Carroll coming on as city manager when we talked about getting the credit rating. I did that. I remember it was a summertime, if I'm not mistaken. And so again, it's come to fruition, and we hope it just continues in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much for your explanation. It really helped me a lot. And thank you also, you mentioned that we've amended our policies. That's also due in part, obviously, to the guidance by Jen Bell and Davenport. So thank you for positioning us by advising us to do that. So
I appreciate it. Tom and Jen were very much at the epicenter of all of that. And, it's just, I'll say one more thing about that. these policies are not something we just pulled off the shelf. There's not what's right for you isn't necessarily right for Rockbridge, right for, the next community down the road. Everyone's unique, but there is an element of similarities. And so we try to do that. And we talked a lot about a lot of those policies and why, does this make sense? What have you? So thank you for that.
Mr. Smith.
Not a question, just comment. It's refreshing to hear that heavy hitters like Moody's and Standards and Poor's have the high opinion that they have of City of Lexington finances and creditworthiness that I think we've heard a lot from our auditors and when we go to VRA for borrowing and that's through the strength of guidance through the councils that I've served on and the governance of staff that we've had over the years and having Standard & Poor's and Moody's say, yeah, you guys are solid. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Betts.
I think Tom mentioned earlier that something we have to vote on would be the not to exceed interest rate, and then was it the maximum debt issuance? Those are the two factors. Is there any benefit to setting a lower maximum interest rate, or how do we go about figuring that out? I think you mentioned that it was not to exceed 5% or something.
5.5, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's set up so that, look, you have projects that you need to do. You've gotten bids on them and you're ready to go. So we set it up so that if rates pop up, again, in the greater scheme of things, a 5.5% fixed rate for a long term is a very solid rate. But we're getting greedy. We really like it in the rates that we're in right now. If it were at 5.5%, if it popped up for that short period of time, more than likely, all that would really do is make it more than probable that down the road, it's going to be easier to refinance as things come back, if they come back down.
And then, but like you were saying earlier, it could be 3% because there could be, multiple or whatever,
But, and I think your question was, are we discounting ourselves by saying 5.5? What if we said 5? Does that make us look
Right.
more
That's
attractive?
kind of-
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
We're pretty sexy.
Okay.
As bonds go, this is pretty sexy. We're AAA, except due to our size, we lost an A, so we're AA. And these are going to fly off the shelf. It is the expectation. Where interest rates are on the day that we go, anybody's guess. Any number of things within our country, within our the world could impact the interest rates. But at this point, the package looks really good. I can say with great confidence. Yeah. David, I want to thank you. It's fitting that Eric was here earlier and talking about the Super Bowl. It's on the cusp, but the team effort, you mentioned our staff that you've been working with, new staff to a certain degree. You've been working with other staff over the years and guiding us. And as we gathered there to pitch our story to Moody's and S&P, I can tell you personally, I invited each of the reviewers no less than 3 times to come visit and see how great this place is and that it is for real. Because they're like, really? And like, yes, it's for real. So RT and David echoed that, and it was a great experience from ours. But being the quarterback, leading us down the field and getting this very successful win that we will see in March, we're very, very grateful and look forward to addressing the resolution later this month and then hearing the results.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Safe travels. Give RT our best.
I will.
Hope Sam's still in the picture.
He is very much, but
Good.
he is he's a Hokie, so we don't let him get too close to here. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. May get lost in the hills. Certainly on a dirt road. Thank you for being with us, and completely understand if you don't stay for the remainder of the meeting. But that's David Rose with Davenport for students. If you want to track him down later, I'm sure he can be found on online, or as old people like to say, on the internet. Next item on the agenda, consideration of minutes. The January 16, 2025 regular meeting minutes were in your packet. Unless there are any objection, or yes, Ms.
Correction,
Strong.
under the Maryland's threshold report, it says recycle, I think it's supposed to be review, what talks about recycling the.
Give me a
housing
paragraph
study.
in a-
Yeah. Jamie knows where it is.
Okay, I've already shared it. Very good. With recycle being changed to reviewed, is there any objection to approving the minutes? Hearing none, they are approved. Next item is citizens' remarks and comments. And as I invited folks earlier, I'm not aware that anybody's signed up. Arnie with a keen eye. No one has signed up, but is there anyone who would like to speak to council this evening? Share thoughts, observations, insights. Your professor didn't equip you with a presentation. Fair enough. With that, I will close the citizens' remarks and comments at 7:40 and go to our next item, which is our consent agenda. There are 2 items, and I would ask for council's consideration.
Make a motion that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. A roll call vote. Mr. Driscoll.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Please make arrangements to attend the 5K and also the Veterans, I believe, or on Memorial Day recognition there. Not aware of any unfinished business. We'll go directly to boards and commissions and the Blue Ridge Resource Authority, Mr. Smith.
No report.
Main Street, Lexington, Mr. Smith.
As you know, the grant application to DHR for funding part of the courthouse grounds was not successful. From a note from Jesse Lyons, who's helped Main Street with this project, more grant funding is being sought after, as well as more private donations. Rebecca Logan right now is at the Virginia Main Street convention in Richmond with new Buena Vista exec director Jen Carpenter. That's the first point of contact with the National Main Street organization. Lots of networking. One thing to highlight is Main Street Lexington's gift certificate program has now generated over $500,000 of monies that stay in our downtown economy. That's quite an achievement, and considering that Main Street's only been around for 10 years, it's 50,000 a year. That's a nice chunk of change to have remain in our downtown business community. That's all I have. Any questions?
Hearing none, I would just acknowledge that the team that has come together, I can't remember the exact name of the committee for the Courthouse Square project, is resolved, despite not getting the grant, is resolved to raising the money and seeing the proposal to its fruition. So stay tuned, and I'm sure we'll get more updates as they make progress, but still very optimistic that programming will get completed. Planning Commission, Ms. Strong.
Planning Commission has not met since our last council meeting, but we will meet next Thursday. And one of the items of business will be a conditional use permit for a childcare facility at Lexington Presbyterian Church. That's all I have.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions for Ms. Strong? Hearing none. Regional Tourism Board, Mr. Betts.
I don't have any report. We haven't met since our last meeting.
Very good. Raro, Mr. Ziegler.
The RARO Finance Committee met last week to start working on our budget for FY26. We'll lean heavily on Jen Bell, so we will certainly have that approved and done on schedule. Then the regular RARO Board of Directors met yesterday. Right now, we received updates that spring registration is ongoing. It goes until the 17th. Around this time each year, we've tried to start offering pitching and catching clinics for softball. And so they just began. And then baseball pitching and catching clinics will also begin, I believe, next week. And And then I'll just extend my appreciation to this council and also the Council of Buena Vista and the Board of Supervisors for being very receptive and asking wonderful questions of our Executive Director, Chad Coffey, and our Chairman, Joey Jones, at the presentation at the Horse Center 1 week ago. Obviously, I've been on RARO for 10 years. We're very excited where we have come, how far we've come in those 10 years, but we also are very excited about where we could go in the future. And that was really the goal of the night, to meet with all of the elected officials and give you all of that background and just put it out there to say, where would you like us to go into the future? Obviously, we use indoor space, gym space, whenever we can. We use all of the fields that we have access to, and we wanted to demonstrate that to all of the elected officials. And so as we go forward, we're open to more questions, we're open to more guidance, but honestly, we wanted to let you know that your investment over the last 5-10 years, how much it has helped us, because our funding comes from the localities, but also as we look to the future, what's possible. So thank you to everyone here.
As an outgrowth from that meeting is, please let council know if there's any action we should take in support of RARO, or I know Chad was very much seeking direction. I think it's important, especially in this budget time, if there are going to be budget ramifications for additional programming, capital, et cetera. It's a great time to be talking a little bit more in depth of that. So look forward to anything you bring forward. Mr. Betts.
I know there's a lot of talk about putting a strategic plan in place. Have y'all discussed a timeline for putting a strategic plan in place yet?
I'll tell you, it's been something that we've talked about at times. I think you're probably familiar, we meet once a month. And so sometimes time can fly by, but having put it out there to the elected bodies and to get the feedback that we did, I think it really has motivated us that our strategic planning process, we need to work outside our regular meetings. And so we'll probably have, I don't want to call it an executive committee, but we'll probably have a smaller group to get things going and divvy up the work. But I'm reluctant to give a time frame, but I think we're more motivated after last week to deliver on what was asked for.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bright future for RARO and the athletics of our community. Thank you. Or the recreation for our community. Threshold, Ms. Alexander.
Yes, we met on the 22nd of January, and by that time we had received the windshield survey that was promised to us, and it was in completed form. The survey has pretty long narrative and a lot of explanations of things, but in the graphics, they're pretty easy to decipher. They're color coded with much of the city reflected in a green color, and the other colors reflecting conditions of houses that are rated 1s and 2s, being in the better condition of homes, and the other colors reflecting conditions that need some attention, levels 3, 4, and 5. The homeowner helper program would benefit the area with at least the 72 homes that are in categories 3, 4, and 5. And there were over 2,000 homes in the 1 and 2 categories. Now, there could be a few variables that we could likely discover with those two groups in the higher groups due to limitations on visibility, because it is a windshield survey. They were riding and looking and using their skills to determine what they could view from the fronts of houses. There were areas, of course, of the rear of houses that were unobserved. So if a rear part of a house is dilapidated, they would not have seen that. So that was one variable that we could likely have to deal with. Because of the aging population in Lexington, some houses in the codes for the green areas, the code that are code 1, we could face the effects of those houses falling into disrepair over time due to the ability to keep them up because of the age of the houses, as well as the ages of the homeowners as they're aging. In other homes, people will pass away and people will leave no clear will and how to direct the future ownership of those houses. So some of them do sit vacant as they do today. And in the future, we could still have that problem. So therefore, we will probably have the homeowner helper program operating into the future, and that will enable us to support those that we will find becoming needing help later in the future, more so than today. We did find out that code enforcement issues are also being addressed with the city manager and the police department. And now that we have this study and we have the regional housing study, it's incumbent upon Threshold to have that information to further develop their homeowner house helper program and what that's going to look like for this community, such as eligibility, administering the program, et cetera. Now, in the next meeting of Threshold will be more discussion of these tools that we now have, these studies that have been done. And because we had just received the windshield survey, that was our initial discussion in that last meeting. So we have a lot more discussion to have. We want to be able to present actual plans to council and to the community. And that's going to take some more time to study and have more conversations to develop a program unique to the community with the resources and funding that are made available to this project. We think that 1 or 2 projects to start off with would be appropriate. That was one suggestion, but we'll be asking the city manager to talk with us again to discuss more details and specifics of running a homeowner helper program, to utilize his knowledge and experience with that he's had with them. And we are going to be discussing such things such as mentioned, the program eligibility criteria, the homeowners, their income limits, how to establish the income limits, any legal ramifications we could have, administering the program and project oversight, contractor procurement, documents that are going to be required, the unique challenges beyond the home-owned houses, such as vacant houses, dilapidated houses, tax delinquent houses, manufactured homes that are surpassing their lifespan. All of that to get a program in place, hopefully before the end of 2025. Any questions?
Members of council have questions for Ms. Alexander from that report. Marilyn, one question I had was, there's some houses candidly that look vacant that may or may not be. Did they have a definition, or how they did you look at the report that granular? Are you able to see that 403 South Main Street isn't vacant? It's just under renovations.
I don't know that they told us what houses were vacant. It was more of I guess a quality, from being
It scored a
minor,
4.
minor defects or no defects would be 1, and then all the way down to dilapidated would be a 5. So I think they scored it like that, whether it was vacant or lived in.
And it's because we have additional knowledge about homes that are vacant that I added that so that we can, in the process of developing this program based on this study, that we can add those things we already know.
Right. And I remember reading somewhere the concept of a land trust being a possible solution or option for some of these. Have you all discussed that at any length?
There was a wide range of recommendations or other options, in terms of developing housing stock in the city.
Right.
We maybe talked about that a little bit, including like what they had a code section, what you can do about tax delinquencies. There's all kinds of different things and projects, including the one that you referenced. So I do think we'll need to delve more into that.
Okay.
But I think this gave us some good objective data points to make policy decisions and outreach decisions moving forward.
Terrific.
The land trust idea was another idea that came from our new city manager. And he has a wealth of knowledge about how to make improvements in all the areas in which we have discussed before he got here.
Right.
And because he was able to give us these wonderful ideas to build upon, we hope to be able to get him out of his city manager office sometime and come to our threshold meeting again and give us some more guidance so that we can move forward without having to depend on him.
I
Very
think
good.
one other thing that came up that, because we were talking about vacant properties, they mentioned potentially, doing a vacant property registry. That is, some places do have that. That is a way to know what's not being utilized. So that's maybe another policy we could consider in the future.
Very good. I don't know if our attorney has any opinion on something like that, a vacant property registry, or to put you on the spot.
No, well, I've seen them used for commercial properties.
Mhm.
Frankly, I've not seen them used for residential. That doesn't mean it's not a viable option. We would certainly
I think
utilize that.
there may be a few cities that were referenced, if I'm remembering correctly, Lynchburg might be one of them.
Would stand to reason. Very good. Very good.
If you want to share the windshield survey with me, I'm happy to look at it. Absolutely. I can comment on some of the options.
Forward to you.
Mr. Driscoll.
When is your next threshold meeting?
It would be the fourth Wednesday.
Wednesday,
So that would be,
February
26th.
26th at 4 o'clock.
For journalism majors keeping track, February 26th at 4 o'clock,
City Hall, second floor.
City Hall, second floor.
And then on the land trust, I think we've talked about it before. There's good examples regionally of using land trusts, even in neighborhoods, not just necessarily one house or two houses, but, and I think it's in Harrisonburg. I have documentation I looked up a long time ago on local initiatives using land trusts.
Yes, there are lots of solutions in many communities when we cast our net for looking for good ideas. Don't have to reinvent the wheel, thankfully.
We started at one point to try to navigate a vacant land listing. And we sent letters out to those that we had information on. And what the little feedback that we got really wasn't that helpful, because like the delinquent houses, the vacant land tends to have issues with wills and deeds and things like that. So it was not something that we could get started at that point.
Very good. Well, good traction, and thankfully the city manager has broad shoulders and good energy, and we will move forward with some of these initiatives and as the year progresses. Next item is my report. I don't have a whole lot. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank David and Leslie for joining me as we rode up to Richmond to rumble with the General Assembly. We met at 10 o'clock with the Virginia First Cities and had a briefing, had a chance to be introduced to and spoken to by the new mayor of Richmond. And I think 5 days into his assuming responsibility, had to deal with the water crisis where the city was shut down because their water system failed. I think it was 6 or 8 days that there was no water. And when we met with some of our representatives, one indicated that they had a challenging circumstance where they went to check into their hotel and there was no water. So they left, made a reservation in another hotel, and was smart enough to say, "Do you have water?" And the answer was yes. And upon arrival said, "I just want to confirm you do have water." And they said, "Yes, but we have no hot water. And consequently, we don't have any heat because it's radiator." So they left and went to a final hotel that had water, hot water, and heat. And no one said it's easy once you get elected to office. The conditions aren't always great. At noon, we went to a VML briefing, and I got, again, good information and good insights from the folks that spoke there and addressed us. And then we came on home. It was last Thursday. Came on home for the DSS and RARO meeting at the Horse Center. So thank you all very much for taking the time away from your families and away from Lexington to hit Richmond and lobby our legislators. With that, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Frank, I'll just
Yeah.
add that
Oh.
while we were there, in speaking of water, we saw Jordan Combs, the executive director of the Maury Service Authority, and he was doing the same thing as we were going to see our legislators, and he was lobbying on behalf of our community.
And the MSA. Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, David, anything that you wanted to add from our visit?
Nope.
Okay, very good. Very good. Mr. Carroll.
Except you put me in the backseat of the police car on the drive there. Whenever we stopped, they had to let me out. I can't get out myself of the police car. So.
Fun ride.
The things you learn.
Thank you. Two things in a general report, and then if there aren't any questions about that, I'll talk about the youth services memorandum. First to report, as you may know already, we had a water main break on Spotswood that we were fixing today, and unintentionally, of course, we managed to cut a fiber optics cable in the roadway. We're still looking into it. The water main break is fixed. And as I was coming in to this meeting, noticed the fiber optics trucks were out and they're working on the repair of that. So on behalf of the city, I'm sorry to anyone whose internet or water service were interrupted. I think in the hierarchy of needs, we know from the prior conversation, the water is more important than the internet. So hopefully that's the spirit with which anyone who's inconvenienced will take it. Second, I wanted to just place a few markers on your upcoming calendars for some work sessions, and we'll articulate all this in a written report. But as you know, next Thursday, we have a work session planned, and the primary topic of that is going to be the draft capital improvement program for fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 30. Though the CIP booklet is not going to be as large and robust. It may not well be complete by Monday when we're planning to issue it. We've had a couple of absences from staff, not me, but that also then demonstrates how little importance I have because it's the other people who weren't here, which were essential to getting that document out. So the CIP, what we're going to present to you is going to be a high-level spreadsheet that shows for each of the major funds, the projects that are planned and slotted, but we will not have, in all likelihood, all the project backup documentation, location justification. So in light of the fact that we may not have all of that material, we can still discuss the high level. I don't think there are any projects that you won't and that you haven't heard about or anticipate seeing, but we're also going to suggest that we have two other items added to that work session. One would be a bit of follow-up on the goal setting session. You have a memorandum in your packet tomorrow, which will be an attempt on my part to distill the conversation into 5 draft goals for you to react to, edit as you see fit, and then also look for some clarification on a couple of other items that were part of the discussion, but I don't know that I have clarity as to exactly what it is the council wants us to do. And then the third item of discussion would be what would Lexington's reaction be if there are any federal eliminations or freezes of grants that are both the Lexington City Schools as well as the city of Lexington rely on for certain services, and some discussion around that. And so that will be the goal setting or work setting session next week. Then the week of February 24th, date yet to be determined, I think it might be helpful for us to have a continuation of the CIP discussion, as well as a presentation around the plans for City Hall. You will have, in all likelihood, bids in front of you on March 3rd for your consideration and approval, just as you do tonight for the DSS project. But I think it would be helpful, and the mayor definitely thinks it would be helpful to have an opportunity to discuss what is in the project, what does it look like, where are we cutting some elements out that might be desirable, what's happening on the physical, the site, the campus of City Hall, what's not happening on the site of City Hall. what the project timeframe would be. And so we're probably looking at February 25th or 26th for that night, because we try and steer clear of Thursdays, the 27th, to not conflict with the Planning Commission. March 6th, we're likely to have a budget work session prior to the council meeting that evening. And then on March 20th, I just want to point out we're scheduling a joint work session with the Lexington City Schools. That's an annual process, although I think it's a little earlier in March than it traditionally is. I think it's traditionally the first meeting in April, but for reasons of having to do with the school calendar, we think that's a better date to have that. So again, I'll put all that into an email and writing, and Janie and I will communicate that, but happy to answer any questions about those work sessions. Or
Is for the most current one, the 13th, is there a time yet?
5:30.
Okay. What about the location? To be determined. Okay. And then what was the last one you said about the school board?
March 20th is your regularly scheduled
Okay.
second meeting in March, and we'll have a joint meeting as we did in October with the school board prior to your council meeting. That'll primarily be talking about budget expectations for the next fiscal year.
Thanks.
As a reminder, we have somewhat regularly scheduled two meetings, one in April and one in October with the school board. Stay connected, understand what their challenges and opportunities are, since they represent probably good 50% of our budget. It's important for us to know exactly what's going on and help maintain that connectivity. So very good.
I'll just add to the cut fiber line that they are working on that right now. They should start there at the point where they're splicing it. They should start splicing it at about 8:30. It has 144 strands. So it will take them till about 12:30. So for people who are affected by it, it may be around a little after midnight before you have your internet back, but it should be completed tonight. And I'll be late to that work session.
Any other questions from council on those items? Not, youth services.
Thank you, Mayor. In your packet this evening was a memorandum that Rebecca Walters, superintendent, and I jointly wrote, and it's laying out an approach that we're exploring. And this is for informational purposes only for you this evening, but we welcome any feedback that you have. This is really the beginning of what I expect would be a month-long conversation with both schools and city, but also community members and potentially the YMCA and folks from Head Start. As the memorandum explains, we've had a youth services department for 35 years, and the incumbent, Tammy Dunn, who is the president of the Lexington City School District Board of Education in her volunteer role, but is also a city employee. She's planning to retire at the end of this fiscal year. And so that program is going to experience a change. That program has an after-school program that serves 25 children, K through 5 students after school, and then also operates 8 to 10 weeks summer camp. The program was started, of course, to help economically disadvantaged students, but it still does, but not all the students are economically disadvantaged. By design, the program is very affordable, has very modest fees so that it's available to all. With her retirement, then we have to explore what do we do as a result of this. It's pretty much a one-person operation, although she does have some Washington Lee students who help, as well as a part-time employee and volunteers. So the three options are to either replace Ms. Dunn, which I'm skeptical that we can do, explore an alternative service delivery model, or just get out of the business of providing any youth services of this kind. And so what Ms. Walters and I are exploring is the YMCA offers after-school programs today at Waddell Elementary. They serve about 30 kids. This is private pay. The YMCA, of course, has scholarships and a fee schedule so that it's available for all students. regardless of their family's income level. But what we're proposing is to take $50,000 of the youth services budget and make it available for the YMCA program to offer scholarships and fee reductions for any students for summer camp or for the after-school program. This, of course, assumes that the YMCA is interested in partnering with us in this fashion and has the ability to accommodate additional students. We won't know how many students will want to migrate over to the YMCA program instead of the after-school program run by youth services. We will find that out soon, but the first thing to do is for us to explore with the YMCA what their level of interest is. And we haven't done that yet, but we will do that soon. If that does pan out to be an area of interest for the YMCA and we're moving forward with that, that will free up the space at 300 Diamond, on the garden level of 300 Diamond that Ms. Dunn currently operates, and it's a very valuable community space. We both believe that it would be an ideal space to locate the Head Start program, which also currently operates out of Waddell. And so if the YMCA program is willing to expand and solve youth services in this fashion, we intend to approach Total Action for Progress to see if they're willing to relocate the Head Start program over to the Diamond Hill area. That makes great sense from a reduction of barriers for people who may want to access the Head Start program. It's very convenient for our most economically disadvantaged area of town. And so we think this will make sense. But again, we haven't approached them. And then the last element is to redirect what's remaining of the youth services budget towards living wages for school staff, which is what's presently reflected in the draft budget, which you haven't seen yet. But that is our intent to repurpose any residual monies that would then benefit the lowest paid employees in the schools, which are our paraprofessionals, custodians, and food service personnel. So that's a lot of information to take in, but basically we're just asking for any feedback. If you have any concerns, would rather hear those now. We plan to engage the YMCA and TAP, and then hold some community listening sessions with parents, with students, with faculty, any stakeholder who might have an interest in what would happen with the youth services program. I should point out, if Head Start does move over to 300 Diamond, that would free up a classroom that they operate out of now, and we think this will have particular benefits for students with disabilities, students who have an IEP. That space would be of great benefit to Waddell Elementary School. So happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, sir. Members of council have questions. Ms. Strawn.
Static comment. I think this is a great plan. I like all parts of it. I hope it works out. When you do talk to Head Start, hopefully we can extend the hours of it. In the past, we've shortened the hours so that there wasn't a conflict in drop off and pickup times with the school. So it'd be great if we could extend them and even have maybe some type of after school. So it is it's a preschool plus a daycare as well to help those parents.
One observation I would make is that the Y programs are considerably more expensive than the current, summer and after school programs. I understand that the scholarship would help offset some of that potentially, but it might be worth seeing if the city contributes money to the Y, if they can do some type of reduction in price.
Great. Yeah, we think with the $50,000 available, that would probably roughly equate to 15 students having the YMCA's summer camp and after school program covered. And some students may not need it all covered. It might be a graduated scale. So we might be able to serve more people.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Alexander.
If Head Start were to move over to the community center, and when their day ends, would it be so bad if we had an after school program there for those children as well as other children who attend now who had been Head Start children? a lot of them, not all of them, of course, to have their day end at 5:30, 6 o'clock, as an extension.
So I think that would definitely be a benefit for the students and for the parents. The question that I don't know the answer to is whether Total Action for Progress would run that, because with this plan that we're proposing, we would not have a replacement for Miss Dunn. We would not replace her. So we would not have a staff resource that we could dedicate to running that program. So I think the answer to your question is going to depend on whether TAP is willing to provide that and whether they have resources to do that, or we have to think through a different model.
So are we going to completely do away with our youth department?
That is this intention with this, yeah.
Arguably, as we know it now, there would be funding for the scholarships and what have you. And I think what I heard the city manager say that gives me some comfort for the discomfort that I sense you have, is that space, they're exploring the options to be able to come back and say what's available and whether it's something with TAP, whether it's something with the YMCA or what have you. The main goal is to continue to provide that type of service without having a one-person department, but to have resources, public or private or partnership of some sort to provide that. So, and the space would continue to be available and a priority for services. That makes sense.
So if after school care were at Waddell or at the Y, does the activity bus for our school system pick children up to take them to another location when that ends at 5:30? So people without transportation, how are they going to pick up their children? Because there are people who totally solely depend on the school bus.
So I'll have to get back to you on the answer to that question because I don't know it.
I was thinking about transportation too. I think that's
One of the unfortunate things when someone retires that's been running a program for so many years, the pivoting and creativity that they've created is you don't realize all the different moving parts and the customization that's taken place. So I perceive between the city manager and the superintendent those details, but as progress is made and they report back, look forward to additional support and guidance on how it can be most effective, without a doubt. Other questions for the city manager? Hearing none. Thank you, Tom. City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Only one item I wanted to mention this evening. About a week or so ago, I worked on some revisions or some proposed general conditions and supplementary conditions for the City Hall renovation contract that had been out to bid, but we issued those general conditions and supplementary conditions as an addendum to the invitation to bid that was already out. Architects generally start with a standard contract and then you work from that to make some changes. The contract for the City Hall was a little different than the DSS contract you're going to be considering later tonight. And what I did was I tried to take the general conditions and supplementary conditions I'd prepared for the social services building and apply it to the City Hall building as well. It took a few more revisions. Some things were not addressed in the architect's contract for City Hall. But because of that, because we issued the general and supplementary conditions, I think that's maybe entirely, but certainly at least in part for why Tom, because of the substance of the changes, we decided to push the bid opening back a week to allow proposed bidders to have an opportunity to digest it. Nothing unusual about the general conditions and supplementary conditions. They take the Form AIA documents and kind of bring them back to the middle ground. They're not purely favoring the architect or the contractor. They support the city or the owner in this case in some respects. They also add some language that's required by the Virginia Code. So that's the significant thing I worked on the last couple of weeks, and just wanted to mention that to you, since that was one of the causes, if not the main cause, for pushing back the bid opening on City Hall. Happy to answer any questions you may have about that, about the work session earlier this evening, or any other matters that are ongoing.
I was going to say, if anybody had any difficulty hearing that, the main gist is that city attorney's been working on the contract for the construction of the renovation of City Hall. And there were some back and forth or review of conditions that essentially delayed the actual bid process by a week. So we're still tracking and moving forward on all of that. So
And my apologies for again turning, and I always turn away from the microphone. Sorry.
I have to get full throttle there. You use your inner middle school teacher voice, right, Chuck?
Would it help if y'all switch seats?
That's
You
what
and
he
Tom?
that's what said.
Members of council have any questions for the attorney? Very good. Next item of business, discussion and consideration of an award of contract, and I'll call him the city manager for the long-awaited DSS contract.
Thank you, Mayor. You've had two reports on this, so I will be brief. The construction budget for the DSS building was about $10 million. We received 7 bids. The low bid, which is recommended for you to award tonight to RL Price, was under $8 million. So this is an excellent bid. We had a work session last week, or a joint meeting, I should say, with Rockbridge County and the City Council for Buena Vista. Both governing bodies affirmed their commitment to the project and endorsed awarding the contract with 2 add alternates, which bring the total project up to $7,955,000 for construction. We are going to report back to all 3 governing bodies on some additional information on solar panels. I hope to have that information in your packet next Friday for the meeting on February 20th. So I still think there's some unresolved issues with that, but the governing bodies all endorsed installing the solar. As long as there's nothing that changes fundamentally what was represented at the meeting, I think that'll be proceeding. We did not receive any objections to the bids from any of the other contractors. The deadline for any objections was yesterday at close of business. We received 0. So we are now in a position to go ahead and award this contract. We estimate that the total cost of the project, including design fees, construction management, special inspections, and a project contingency, is now $10 million. And so we had referenced during the discussion about our bond rating, how much we will issue bonds. We'll be reporting back to you on that a little bit later, but this is under budget, and it's excellent news for the taxpayers of Rockbridge County, Buena Vista, and Lexington.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Any questions from council members? Hearing none, would ask for your consideration.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2025-04 awarding the Human Health Services construction project as presented with RL Price.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, would ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Mr. Driscoll.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, one and all. It's been a long slog of looking at a variety of options and potential leases and interesting gyrations over the years, but very excited to have a professional and secure building that we're working towards to provide for our Department of Social Services. So good work, and thank you all very much. City Manager, Lime Kiln Bridge update.
Thank you, Mayor. This item is, again, also for your information. If you have any questions or concerns, happy to hear them. The Lime Kiln Bridge, as you know, had some emergency repairs done in the last calendar year within this fiscal year. And we're working on, with VDOT on a replacement project of the entire bridge. The project is being managed by VDOT and is fully funded and is slated to start in June of 2026. So the time between now and June of 2026, when it will be bid, will be spent on design of the project. VDOT's process requires a public meeting, which was held on January 9th, and there were a number of residents who attended, which we appreciate. And some of the residents voiced a desire that the Lime Kiln Bridge add a second sidewalk on both sides of the bridge, one on each. Right now, the Lime Kiln Bridge has a sidewalk on only one side of the bridge. And so VDOT listened to that and studied what would be involved, and it would involve delaying the project, and it would require a much higher level of environmental review. And I think most importantly, it would require a different funding source than what VDOT has secured for this project. And so that would delay the project, potentially cost VDOT and Lexington City a significant amount of additional money. Well, we support the idea of having two sidewalks. We don't think that that's advisable given the condition of the bridge. City engineer and our inspectors and Public Works and I have all inspected the bridge, and we're concerned about its integrity. Not that it's about to collapse, but that the bridge might be closed before it would fail. In the last month, we've had to bolt metal plates onto the bridge deck in order to make sure that which is sinking slowly, is secured. So we don't think the condition of the bridge is in any way unsafe, but we also are not expecting it to last forever. And so there's a great deal of urgency for us to move forward with the design. And so this memorandum is just to update City Council and the community on, we've heard those concerns, we understand those concerns. We, in many ways, agree with the concerns that some residents expressed in January, but city staff's direction is to tell VDOT to proceed with the design of a replacement bridge. There will be enhancements to it. It will have a wider sidewalk. It will be built to today's standards, but it won't have two sidewalks on either side of the bridge. Happy to take any questions or receive any feedback.
Members of council have any comments or information for the city manager?
One question would be, yeah, it's disappointing, but a bird in the hand these days is worth going with on the funding. Maybe one way to deal with that issue of the only one sidewalk is how the crosswalks are done so that it's clear where you cross to get to the new sidewalk on both ends. I think when you go stand there, it's so I don't know whose responsibility that would be, the city or VDOT, but as part of the project, just making sure crosswalks are clearly put in to help you cross from the one side that doesn't have the sidewalk to the side that has it.
John, two comments, both flippant. One, we shouldn't let perfection get in the way of excellence and getting a great bridge. And the other is, I'm not sure, you obviously haven't lived in Lexington long enough. It doesn't matter where you put the crosswalks. People are going to cross where they damn well please.
Somebody's gonna stop anyway.
And then taunt you if you're driving, that they have the right of way. So, but your point is very, very well taken. So I hope you appreciate my somewhat getting to be late night humor, at least an attempt. Any other questions for the city manager? Very good. Before I close the meeting, again, want to thank the journalism class for being here. Who's the professor that sent you? Walters? Very good. I'm not familiar with Professor Walters, but with Eric Wilson having been here earlier, and provoking thoughts of the case to have trophies. I always love to tell the story of growing up in Lexington and attending Liber Downing, and there was the opportunity, this being oral history, it's not documented anywhere that I'm aware of, thank goodness, but I always love to tell the story. There was young man, Garfield Lewis, who was a very accomplished athlete, just an amazing set of skills. Had friends like Pug Merchant and Eric Oatmeal Walker, terrific guys that I grew up with. But Garfield Lewis was on the opposing team when I was playing rec basketball. His team, which I believe was Press Browns, and I was on White Front, they beat us 52-2. And before you get too excited, as you well know, you change courts, baskets at halftime. Garfield got confused and made our two. So we were held scoreless. But again, a fond memory of my youth and time at Libbern Downing Middle School. And for those of you students, if you haven't wandered into visited our schools, I encourage you to do so. Please check in and be responsible and safe as you should be. But I also implore you to wander around and enter as many of the public buildings downtown that you can. We have remarkable architecture and even more remarkable people and fittings, if you will, inside the buildings, whether it be churches or professional spaces. I know that you frequent the restaurants and glad that you do that, but make a point to take advantage of all the opportunities here in Lexington. Unless council members have any other items, not aware of anything on the agenda. Ms. Alexander?
Just a little clarity. You told them to check in at the school to be
Yes.
safe.
Yes.
It's not that our schools are unsafe. It's just checking in to the office so they know you're in the building.
Being responsible. Exactly. Exactly. Lots of meetings later days this month. Feel free to join us. And unless there's an objection, we stand adjourned at 8:31. Thank you all.